Good morning, and welcome to the Prevailing Word of God Community Church. I am First Lady Joyce Harden, excuse me, and our pastor is Pastor Anthony Harden. Um, this is a presentation from Issues of the Heart Mental Health Ministry within the Prevailing Word of God Community Church. And Issues of the Heart Mental Health Ministry was established in 2018 under Pastor Harden's leadership. And our scripture for this ministry is Proverbs 4:23. And it says, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. And as you can see on the slide, it says, above all else, guard your heart. And it says, what you see, what you say, what you do, what you hear, everything we do flows from our heart. So this morning, during the presentation, if you have any questions about this topic, our topic today is teen depression, understanding and recognizing the symptoms of depression in our youth. So if you have any questions about this topic, you may write them in the chat of our YouTube channel, which is the Prevailing Word of God Community Church, or you may text them to 909-684-1389. Questions will be taken after the presentation, and those who are in the sanctuary with us, you may also please feel free to ask any questions. So now, for the past few years, we have just, our hearts have just been hurt about some of the things that we're hearing about our teenagers. Some of our teenagers are shooting up schools, most recently, churches, a private school, Christian school. And so our hearts ache for our youth, and we wonder what is going on. So today, I'd like to provide some information on youth and depression, distinguishing normal adolescent behaviors from depressive symptoms. So what's normal behavior and what's depression? True or false? And you may be able to, just blurt out the answer, or just within yourself, those who are watching online on this morning. Normal behavior or depression. Changes in appearance, changes in their clothes, changing in how they do their hair and tattoos. And, when I see teenagers with different hair colors, I immediately think, wow, you're trying to separate yourself from your parents. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. You're trying to find out exactly who you are. So, with the changes in clothing, unless it's just so bizarre, that's normal. And then they may get some tattoos, and usually tattoos tell a story. So if they get a tattoo, you want to find out what is the story behind this tattoo. They won't clean their room. Well, we know that's normal. I tell parents all the time, don't major on minors. If they're doing very well in school, if they're getting A's and B's in school, and their behavior is okay, they won't clean their room, don't major on minor issues. And I know how we feel about our homes being clean. Well, that's normal. They don't get along with their siblings. And during therapy with some teenagers, parents will say, well, Joyce, they just fight all the time. Well, anyone who have siblings or grew up with siblings, you know that that's pretty normal behavior with teenagers. And sleeping longer. Their bodies are growing, so yes, they may sleep a little longer. Does not necessarily mean that they're lazy. So we'll talk about that a little later. Eating more. Oh, yes. Especially boys. Sometimes we think, wow, they're going to eat us out of house and home, but it's because they are growing. Their bodies are changing. And then there's being defiant. Unless the defiance is a symptom of, of oppositional defiant disorder, it's a symptom of a mental health disorder. Being defiant with teenagers is just normal. They're just going to disagree, especially with their parents, and thinking they are ugly. We also know that this is a time for teenagers when they are very aware of how they look, and they're comparing themselves to others. So all of these are normal behaviors with our teenagers. So what we need to know about teen depression. Left untreated, depression can have long-term consequences. So it's important for us to recognize the signs and seek help early in order to prevent serious consequences or such as suicide or self-harm. So teenage depression is increasing. 1 in 3 teenagers, that's 30%, reported feeling sad or hopeless, and they just lost interest in some of the things that they used to do, going out with their friends, maybe participating in a sports. I just don't feel like doing it anymore. And according to the National Institute of Mental Health, 3.2 million children, that's a lot, ages 12 to 17-year-olds have suffered from at least one major depressive episode within the past year. So we want to make sure that we recognize the signs, and we will look at some of those signs just in just a little bit. So now, we do know that parents are very frustrated when dealing with their teenagers. Anyone who have raised teenagers, we know that there comes a point where we're just frustrated because parents will say, well, I ask him or her all the time, well, what's going on? How are you doing? And they say, well, you know, they just won't talk to me. Well, we know that teenagers, after they reach a certain age, 13, 14, especially 15 and 16, 17-year-olds, we know that they value, you know, what their peers think more so than what their parents think, right? They go to their peers for consultation, for counseling, and their peers may be having the same issues they're having, but they go to them. They don't listen so much to their parents until they get in their mid-20s, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then parents say, well, they're just lazy. Well, something's wrong. So is there laziness, a character flaw, or is it academic burnout? Sometimes we forget that our children, our teenagers are involved, and if they are involved in extracurricular activities and they're trying to do schoolwork, you know, just like adults, we get burned out. So is it because they're just burned out? And then also there are the puberty changes. They say, you know, what do they have to worry about or be depressed about? Well, you know, you really be surprised. You know, in my counseling with teenagers, especially if they're from a single family, you know, and the mother is the only one who's providing, you know, the financial support for the children, teenagers are very aware of what's going on in the household. So they may be concerned and worried about the finances. You know, they may see and understand that their mother, or if it's a single father, that they may be struggling financially, you know, and that they can see their parents may be worrying and having some anxiety. So there are some things that teenagers are worried about, and because of this, it may cause them to be a bit depressed and wanting to know, well, what can I do to help my parents? So they do have some concerns and some worries. And then parents will say, well, Joyce, they're just moody. Yes, they are. But we will talk about why they are moody in just a few minutes. So yes, okay, that's not necessarily a symptom of depression, but it could be, right? And then they say, you know, they're just going through puberty. Oh, yes, they are. And with puberty come huge changes in their life. And then parents will say, well, they'll just get over it. Well, let me just ask parents, when you were a teenager and there are some issues that you were concerned about, that you just get over it? Or did it take you some time to maybe get over whatever that issue was that was bothering you? And then parents will say, well, they don't know what anxiety and depression is. Well, you know what? You're absolutely right. They may not know what anxiety and depression is. they may be feeling a certain way, but not understanding why am I feeling this way? What's going on with me? Why am I always sad? Why am I not happy? Why am I feeling this way? Why do I want to just isolate and be by myself? So you're absolutely right. They may not be understand what's going on with them. And then last, he or she has to do better than me. Now, that's an expectation that we will talk about. So here are some of the pressures that teenagers face. Unrealistic academic expectations placed on them by their parents. And because these unrealistic expectations are placed on their parents, they up and then they begin to have these unrealistic expectations on themselves. I want to give you an example of a few years ago. I was the director of a mid-sized church in New York City. And they had quite a few young adults and teenagers. So we coordinated a young adult youth retreat. And at this retreat, one of the young adults who we thought, wow, this young lady is just, even the teenagers aspired to be like this young lady. She participated in any youth young adult events. She was doing well in college. She on the dean's list, getting all A's, doing very well. But at this retreat, she disclosed to us that she contemplated suicide. And all of us were shocked because we knew her mother and wondered, why would she contemplate suicide? She's doing so well. But this was an unrealistic expectation placed on her by her mother. Her sister, she had a sister, her sister had passed, and she was the only child now. So her mother was putting all of these unrealistic expectations on her. You have to be perfect. You got to go to church. You got to be the one outstanding. You have to be the a youth leader. You have to do this. You have to do well in school. And it was just too much pressure for this young lady. So she contemplated suicide. We never know what's going on with our teenagers. And then there's another client that I have right now, unrealistic expectations that is being placed on her as well from a parent. And then there's the social pressure that teenagers and young adults face from their peers. There's that peer pressure from negative peers. There's the pressure to engage in drinking alcohol, using drugs, having sex perhaps before they're even ready, but then there's that pressure. And then there is something that is new now with teenagers and especially with Generation Z. But teenagers are also engaging in this. And that is what we call throning. You can look this up. When I found out about it, I looked it up and I said, wow, it's not a new thing. It's just a new phrase. So throning is a new trend. And throning is when a person dates someone for social status or influence. So teenagers may engage in throning, okay? This is a part of that social pressure that they get. If they're feeling insecure about themselves, they may date someone who they feel is popular in school just so that they can become popular, someone that can just kind of increase their status in school. But one of the things that we don't realize that even with this throning, and when young people begin to date other people, and there's the violence in dating, and they will not tell their parents if a boyfriend or even a girlfriend is physically abusing them. But they may also date someone so they can feel valuable or feel validated. And that's why it's important, parents, for us to validate our children as well, okay? And then there are family expectations. Now, family expectations are, you can do better. You need to get a degree. You need to be the first one in our family to graduate from college. because nobody else in our family has graduated from college. And you also need to help with your siblings while I am at work. Now, this is a pressure that's also put on our teenagers. And teenagers, and you may say, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with them taking care of their siblings while I'm at work, especially if I'm a single parent? Well, I understand that single parents need their children maybe to help. But if they are cooking and helping their siblings with homework, and if they're not able to enjoy, teenage activities at school or extracurricular activities, then they become parentified. That's a word that we use when a child or a teenager is taking care of their siblings as if they were the parent. So we really don't want that to happen, because then they can become depressed, and they can also engage in other behaviors that are negative. And then there's when things go wrong at school or at home. This is another pressure. Losing a friend at school, being a part of a group, and we know that they're teenagers. We know that teenagers have cliques, in school. So losing a friend or no longer being a part of that clique, that could cause them to be depressed. Then there's failing grades, unable to participate in a certain activity at school that they wanted to participate in. And then one of the other pressures that teenagers face is, I just don't want to go home, because there's domestic violence at home. Their parents are constantly arguing. They are even physically fighting, cursing one another out. And so the teenagers saying, I just don't want to go home, because I just don't want to be a part of that or to hear that. So that is another pressure also that that they have right now. And then there's social media. Social media is also where they are looking at Instagram, whatever social media platform they're a part of. They are comparing themselves to other teenagers, and I call that something that, and those of you who are Christians, I said that comparison thing is something that Satan developed, because it causes our teenagers to say to themselves, I'm too fat, I'm too skinny, well, I want to look like this person. And we also know that social media is not always truthful. The teenagers can be posting things that, for other people to see, and they know it's not truthful. But then some teenagers will take that as truth and start comparing themselves. And that can cause them to also be depressed. So parents, we have to also be careful about social media. So now, we said puberty. They're just going through puberty. Well, I want you to take out that just, because they're not just going through puberty. They are going through puberty, which are huge changes. And those changes in adolescence is a period where they are transitioning from being a child into being an adult. And during this time of puberty, they want to individuate themselves from their parents. So now what does that mean, individuate? It means that they want to find out, who am I apart from my parents? Up until now, they pretty much take on, their parents' values and what their parents want to do. And during this time, they want to form a personality that's apart from their parents. So that's why we'll see maybe the change in clothes. That's why we'll see the change in hairstyles, maybe dyeing their hair orange or purple or whatever. But that's all normal, because they want to be able to have a separate identity from their parents. Okay? So then that causes parents to say, oh my gosh, who is this kid that I raised? Not understanding that they're only trying to separate themselves from their parents. So we say that puberty, there's these huge changes with puberty. So what are some of these changes? They're changing physically, they're changing intellectually, they're changing emotionally, and they're changing socially. And their brain continues to develop. Their brain continues to develop until they're in their mid-20s. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the brain development when we talk about self-medication and using drugs. But the front part of their brain is what we call the frontal cortex. And that is the last part of the brain to fully develop. So it won't finish maturing until our teenagers or our children, really, from the time they're born. It won't finish maturing until they are in their mid to late 20s. I'd usually say maybe 25, is when it will finish maturing. So this area of the brain, it controls executive functioning. It controls planning, prioritizing, and it also controls impulses. And because it develops so late, our teenagers may have a lapse in judgment, and they also may feel like, they can do anything. They may feel like they can jump off the top of a mountain and won't get hurt, that they're invincible. It's only because the logic just isn't there sometimes, and they engage in at-risk behaviors, and they do have mood swings. So we see right here on the slide, and I wanted to put this up, but we see that with their changing brains, that they are more likely to act on impulses. They can misread social and emotional cues, and they get into accidents, they get involved in fights, and they engage in risky behaviors. And this is the one I like over here where you see this boy where it says social media up there. It's everything about social media, and then they want to eat a lot, and there's the music. But then there's a plug that also says parental advice processor. And there's a plug there in that ear, meaning that I just don't want to hear what my parents have to say. So we all know that that's normal behavior. So what we need to know about teen depression. Depression can be hard to diagnose in teens. And why is that? Because some of the normal behavior is that they may become moody, but it can also be a sign of depression. Teenagers do not always understand, as I said earlier, why they're feeling a certain way. And because of this, they may not seek help. They may not be aware of the symptoms of depression. So now let's look at some of the symptoms of depression. So now there has to be 5 or more of the following symptoms during the same 2-week period. It has to be consistent over a 2-week period, okay? So one of the symptoms must be either a depressed mood or a loss of interest. So we see here that they're feeling overly worried. They're feeling sad, empty, hopeless, or worthless. And sometimes they really don't understand, why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling so sad? Why am I empty? Also, they're not being able to do schoolwork, and there's a drop in grades as well. And then feeling like their brain is playing tricks on them, or they're hearing someone knocking or scratching. I can hear some adults saying now, well, or they hear their name being called. I can hear some adults saying, well, Joyce, I hear things, my name being called, and I'm not depressed. Well, it's just one of the symptoms of teenage depression, okay? And again, we look at some of these symptoms, and we want to understand what teenage depression is so that we can recognize these symptoms. Additional symptoms is loss of interest, things that they once enjoyed doing that they're now withdrawing from. If they once enjoyed going out with their friends, excuse me, and you would just tell them, well, you can't go out all the time, and now all of a sudden they're just staying in their room. They're isolating. They just don't want to be bothered with anyone. They may have had a close relative, cousin or someone who they enjoy being around. Now they just don't want to be around anybody at all. Then there's the changes in the sleep patterns. Excuse me, talked about that earlier. Because their bodies are developing and growing, they do sleep. But we want to understand, are they sleeping more than usual? And is there a drop in their energy level? Are they getting up just feeling tired? And then irritability, angry, or restlessness. Teenagers, we know, because the mood changes, they will become irritable. But is this a little bit more than the norm? And also they have indecision, lack of concentration, or they're forgetting things. And then also there is poor appetite or overeating. Now, you know, teenager in your house who eats a lot and all of a sudden they're not eating too much at all, then that's a sign that they could be depressed. So let's look at some additional symptoms that may indicate depression. Overreaction to criticism. We know teenagers, they don't like to be criticized, but they overreact to it. They're overly emotional to criticism and feeling that their dreams just won't come true. This is what I was talking about when we said sometimes our teenagers are parentified. You know, parents are expecting them to maybe take on adult roles. So then a teenager may feel like I don't have any time to pursue my interests. So they may feel like my dreams won't ever come true because I have to do A, B, C, and D at home to help my parent who is single. And then there's a poor self-esteem or feeling guilty. If I don't stay at home, if I don't help my parent, then there's this guilt because, you know, this is what my mom or my single dad's trying to do for us. But then along with that comes poor self-esteem. Our teenagers may have a poor image of themselves, and we may not even know it. We can tell them that they're beautiful. I have had teenagers and young adult females, just beautiful young women, and they have low self-esteem because they think that they're not beautiful. But the low self-esteem is coming from somewhere else. So it does not matter how they look. They can be beautiful, but they'll still have poor self-esteem. Then there's substance abuse. Now I want to talk about the substance abuse a little later, but that could be related to depression. And because of depression, they self-medicate. We'll talk about that later. And then there are problems with adult authority. Their parents, their teachers are just being defiant, and frequent complaints about headache, back pains. These are what we call somatic symptoms. They may feel the depression in their body. They may have headaches all the time or stomach aches all the time. They may have pain in their backs. And then the parent is saying, well, I don't understand what's going on with them. These can be symptoms of depression. And then lastly, there's a suicidal thought or actions. So now, these are also some life changes that may indicate depression. Loss of a loved one. They may have lost a grandmother, someone whom they were very close to, an uncle, a brother, someone who they could talk to and confide in. Now this person is gone. This could cause depression. Then we talked about the social isolation. And then there are major changes in school, major changes in their lives, which will cause them to make some major adjustments in their lives. Changes in school, you know, moving from one state to another where now you don't know anybody. You may be going to a state where relatives are, but you don't really know them, you know. So your parents separate or your parents divorce, and now you're in a blended family situation. That causes a teenager to be depressed. And then there are personal conflicts in relationships. You know, teenagers, they have girlfriends, they have boyfriends. And when those relationships are not going well with them, that could also cause them to be depressed. And then there's bullying. You know, we talked about bullying several years ago, so a lot of you are familiar with bullying, but I won't get to that. I really want to talk about microaggression. We'll talk about microaggression later. Then there's dysfunctional family life. As I said earlier, you know, teenagers do not want to go home because there's domestic violence in the home and their family is just dysfunctional, or their family may be involved in illegal activities and they just don't want to go home. And then we want to look at physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. The parent been physically abusive to the child. Or there could be a family member who have sexually abused, or family friend of a family who have sexually abused teenagers. Teenagers usually won't say anything. If it's a family member or if it's a friend of a family, they'll stay quiet. And this would definitely lead to depression because they do not want to break up the family because they love this person. So there's this conflicted feeling that comes upon them. If I say something and it was a family member, then my family's going to be broken up. Or will my mom or my dad believe me? There have been situations where children have been sexually abused and they have disclosed their stories to me, and it's all have been around, I love this person, and I just don't understand how this could have happened because there are these conflicted feelings, not understanding that you can love someone but hate the act that they did. So there's that sexual abuse as well. And then there is the emotional abuse. And that emotional abuse is what parents tell their teenagers. You're going to be just like your dad who may be doing some things that's illegal or negative behavior, but words hurt. And sometimes children will internalize those words, and now they cannot move forward and be successful, and that will cause them to have maybe low self-esteem because my mama said this about me. So if my mama said this about me and my mama loved me, it has to be true. Not necessarily so. So we have to really watch the words that we give our children. We want to be able to validate them rather than to break them down. So now let's talk about self-medicating. Teenagers who struggle with emotional problems, put this up here, who struggle with emotional problems or depression will most often turn to alcohol or drug use to try and help them feel better. So teenagers may be struggling, so they'll maybe smoke marijuana, drink alcohol, but this is only short term because substance use may help them reduce those wanted feelings of feeling sad and depressed, but there's a price that comes with that, okay? And because their brains are still developing, as I mentioned earlier, self-medicating can result in abuse, dependency, and even addiction. Substance abuse and dependency develop faster in our teenagers because their brains are still developing. So we want to understand that. So substance abuse is overindulgence and or dependency on a substance, especially alcohol or drugs, and it can even be marijuana. Dependency is when the person has a psychological reliance on that substance. It requires medical support to stop them and sometimes stop them from using it. And during this time, we can also see that maybe the person is going through withdrawals. And then addiction, definition of addiction. That involves compulsive behaviors such as repeating the use of the substance even though it is affecting a person's health, it's affecting their relationship with others, and teenagers sometimes have jobs, it even be affecting their jobs. So we want to be very mindful that teenagers who have depressive symptoms, that they also may self-medicate. Also, teens who are depressed may feel more emotionally even. What does that mean? That means that when they drink or when they smoke marijuana, it cheers them up. But as I said, it's only for a short period of time. So teenagers with depression, they might start off smoking marijuana before they go to school or before social events, just to kind of get them going and to make them good and, active and vibrant. but not understanding again that it is only temporary. And the core issue isn't the substance. The core issue is what's causing the depression. And that is what we have to um, get to the bottom of. It is these unresolved issues with the teenagers that's causing this depression. So we have to find out what are some of these unresolved issues that's causing you to feel depressed, that's causing you to self-medicate. So Dr. Taskaran of the Child Mental Institute, he said, the result is that teens feel even worse when they're not using. And because of this, that's one reason substance abuse is also a risk for teenagers committing suicide. So we want to understand that self-medicating is only temporary, and it does not really give them long-term relief. It gives them short-term relief. And then we want to understand, parents, that our children's brains are still developing from the time they are born, really, even in utero. But let's just say from the time they're born until they get into their mid-25. So we want to be aware of any substance use or that they are around, marijuana smoking, alcohol, anything, that we want to also understand their brains are still developing, and we want our young people to have strong minds. Amen? Amen. All right. So now let's look at microaggression. What is microaggression? Microaggression is when a certain culture or ethnicity, when they are use subtle, and sometimes it could be unintentional. Sometimes they know what they're doing. It could be verbal, it could be behavioral or environmental slights, according to Dr. Chester Pierce. But these slights convey hostility, they're derogatory, and their negative attitudes toward people based on their race, their culture, their gender, and other aspects of their identity. So why do I bring microaggression up? Microaggression is one of these things that issues that as adults and those of us, who are over 50, we have known people to say, oh, can I touch your hair? Someone who's not of our race. Can I touch your hair? Especially, if your hair is natural. Can I just touch your hair? That's a microaggression. Why is that? Because they expect the hair to be wiry. They have these expectations, and then there are these stereotypes, okay? So that's a part of the microaggression. So we're going to look at some of the things that our children go through, that we went through, and we just said, because we understood racism, sometimes our teenagers don't understand that as much anymore, because, our teenagers are not like us. They have friends of all ethnicities, all cultures, and all races. And we didn't, those of us who are over 50. We just stuck to our race. So they may not understand when microaggression and some of these statements are being aggression toward them and their microaggression. So let's look at some of them. And this can happen especially in schools with teachers. So want to be aware of it, because your child may come home and say something to you, but let's understand that these are microaggression statements in the schools. So assuming that all students have access to or are proficient in the use of computers and applications of communications about school activities and academic work. Assuming that. It's not necessarily true. Assuming that students of particular ethnicities cannot speak English well. And this reminds me of our president, who used microaggression toward an African leader. And he was meeting with this leader, and he said to this leader, oh, you speak English very well. Now, this is a man who's very well educated. We won't get into politics, but we know what our president is like. But this man is very well educated. And he said to him, oh, you speak English very well. Where did you learn to speak English that well? That's a microaggression. Complimenting non-white students on their use of good English. Okay? Also telling someone who is Latino, oh, you speak very good English. Or someone who is, from a different culture, um, not necessarily African Americans, but, it could be some other culture, telling them, oh, you speak English very well. Discouraging students from working on projects that explore their own social, cultural identities. Black History Month, not having activities in school for them to explore that. Then we know that Native Americans, what their history is like, and also Latinos, not encouraging that. And then ignoring student-to-student microaggression. Student-to-student microaggression can be one student telling another student, oh, your nose is pretty wide, or your mouth is pretty big, or, I shared with my sister-in-law, somebody said to me years ago, oh, you have gray eyes. No, they're hazel. Um, are you part white? Microaggression statements. And then making assumptions about students and their backgrounds. Making assumptions that, excuse me, they may come from a very negative background, when that may not be the case at all, but that's an assumption that is made with some of our minority students. And also featuring pictures of students of only one ethnicity or gender on the school website or even in the classroom. And having white students, Caucasians, engage in required reading. All of these are microaggressions that our teenagers may experience in school, but they do not have the word for it. So if they come home and say, this is what happened, then we know that it is a part of microaggression toward our children. Also, having depression doesn't mean that a person is weak or they're a failure or that they're really not trying, okay? Some cultures view seeing a therapist as a weakness. They see it as a stigma. So if they're teenagers going through something, they may tell them to get over it. Or if a teenager comes home, especially a male, and say they're being bullied by another male, and they come home and tell their father, the father's African American, they'll most likely say, stop being a punk, man up, stop being weak. But needing to see a therapist doesn't mean that the person is weak. Doesn't mean that they're a failure. It just means that they need a little help. Maybe they can go to a school counselor who will help them, or a trusted family friend, a family doctor, or a pastor. Pastors are always good. And I put in a responsible adult. We have to make sure that adult is responsible and will lead them the right way. So now there are some other disorders connected with depression. And I know I'm talking pretty fast, but I want to be able to get any questions that you all may have. But there are other disorders connected with depression. Adjustment disorder. An adjustment disorder, excuse me, it can be mixed with depression or anxiety, or it can be mixed mood. And what is adjustment disorder? Adjustment disorder, as I said earlier, is mental health diagnosis when anyone, it could even be an adult, but especially with our children, our teenagers, it is when there is a change in their life, a major change. So we look at a teenager who have gone to school with their friends from elementary school through middle school, and now they're in high school, and now all of a sudden the parents have to move to another city. So now they will not have those friends. That's an adjustment. Where a teenager is big on making friends and being a part of something. So now it's like, now what do? My friends are there, so they have some depression and definitely some anxiety. And let me say, anxiety and depression are co-occurring. Usually if they have depression, they have anxiety. If they have anxiety, they have depression. They're co-occurring disorders, okay? So they may be a bit anxious so now what do? I was involved in all of this at my school, my friends, I hung out with them. So now I have to make new friends, okay? So that's an adjustment disorder. They could have mixed mood, or it could be adjustment with depression or anxiety. Usually it's with both. So also we talked about a change in their lives, about their mother or their father remarrying. Now there's this, excuse me, now there's this blended family situation that they are part of. What a huge adjustment that a teenager, especially, or even a child, has to make and get used now to another family setting. That now they have to maybe, the other parent is expecting them to be close to their stepmother, their stepfather. And that does not happen overnight. Or if that other parent have other children, it does not happen overnight. So your child or your teenager, they need some therapy to kind of like help them understand, what's going on, and what's happening, to help them accept that change a little quicker. And also, there's a divorce. So this disorder, adjustment disorder, it usually lasts about 6 months. And sometimes it can go longer than 6 months. But understand that if that is happening, please maybe seek some help for your child, because they are going through some major adjustment changes. Okay? So, now, parents, what can you do to help? You can seek assistance right away if you recognize any of these symptoms. If your child or your teenager start hearing voices or seeing things that nobody else sees now, okay, you say, well, wouldn't that mean that perhaps they are having a schizophrenia type symptoms? No. Hearing voices or seeing things can be a symptom of depression. Does not necessarily mean that they're schizophrenic, okay? Experiencing unexplainable changes in their thinking, in their speech, and their writing. Also, social media is being used by them quite often, and they are comparing themselves, and they are engaging in self-harm. So social media, we know that there are some platforms that will even teach teenagers how to self-harm without killing themselves, how to cut themselves without cutting the vein. So there are social platforms that teach them how to do self-harm. So we have to be very mindful and careful about the social platforms that our children and teenagers are on. And then being overly suspicious or fearful, we see that there's a drastic decline in their school performance, where as they were getting A's and B's, now, they're getting failing grades. There's a change in their personality. So parents, all of these, if you see any of these changes in your teenager, you want to be able to seek help right away. If they're showing or having thoughts of plans or killing themselves, or hurting someone else, want to be mindful of this as well. Also, if they are talking about suicide, they won't talk about it to you. They may contemplate it or think about it, okay? But most people who are depressed don't commit suicide. But depression does increase the risk for suicide or suicide attempts. And it is not true that people who talk about suicide do not attempt suicide. Okay? I want to give you, just share a couple of stories with you, with a couple of clients that I had. I had a 16-year-old client a few months ago, and I was doing the assessment with her. I was going to work with her brother, her, and I got some information from her mom. But I was doing the assessment with her, and she was dressed in all black. Hair was very dark. So doing this assessment with this teenager, as therapists, we have to always say, everything is confidential, with the exception of you're telling me about child abuse, elder abuse, that you're going to hurt yourself or you're going to hurt somebody else. At that point, we have to breach confidentiality. So she already knew that. So when it came to my asking her about, had she ever thought about suicide or about hurting herself or hurting someone else, she said to me, no, I've never thought about hurting anybody else, but I've thought about suicide. Okay, that doesn't shock me. I've had, clients who say they thought about it, okay? So my next step was, okay, when was the last time you thought about it? She said a week ago. Well, now, I'm like, okay, a week ago. So why didn't you do it a week ago? Well, something was going on, some activity that she wanted to attend, I think, or something. I can't quite remember right now. But she didn't do it a week ago. I said, okay, so are you still planning on committing suicide? And she said, yes. So I had to assess for a plan. And she definitely had a plan. She knew the day that she was going to do it, which was only going to be in a few days. She had the means, okay? So she knew how she was going to do it. She had the means to do it. And knowing all of that, immediately I said to her, okay, now I have to let your mom know in order to keep you safe. So I asked her to put her mom, to go and get her mom, and she did. And her mother had no idea that her daughter was thinking about committing suicide. No idea at all. So I told her, you have to take her to the nearest hospital ASAP, right now, in order to keep her safe. And her mother did that. And she took her to the hospital. She followed up with me and said the hospital kept her for a couple of weeks, and then they placed her in an inpatient type residential facility so that she could get, some very thorough care and prevent her from committing suicide. But I also want to tell a quick story too about a 10-year-old child who I was seeing. Her father had just passed. Remember I said that the passing of a loved one may cause a person to be depressed. And I assessed this 10-year-old, for self-harm and suicide. 10-year-old told me that she was thinking about, killing herself. She didn't quite use the word suicide. Killing herself. So, okay, again, why? Because her father had passed suddenly, and she wanted to be in heaven with her dad. So explaining to her that death is final. And we don't wake up the next morning and say, oops, I made a mistake. It's final. You don't get to be a teenager. You don't get to be a young adult. And working with this 10-year-old, her mother also did not know she was thinking this. And letting her mother know this, her mother was able to also be careful with her and her grandmother. So we worked through that with this 10-year-old. But what I'm saying, parents, is that a lot of the times our teenagers do not tell us what's going on with them, and we cannot read their minds. So when we see some of these symptoms that I mentioned earlier, or you recognize something is not right with my child, okay, then immediately seek help. When you see an increase in substance use, when you see an increase in isolation, all these things that we talked about, immediately seek help for your child. And lastly, I will give you one additional example of an 8-year-old who did commit suicide. And this was years ago at a residential facility where I was working. And this little boy had no parents. He was, in the foster care system at a residential facility, 8 years old, 8. And this little boy, his grandfather was going to get him. The day that his granddad was going to come and pick him up, his grandfather had a heart attack. And this little boy thought that his granddad was going to die. And we kept telling him, no, he's not going to die. he was the client of one of my colleagues. And excuse me, we got the call. He went to the beach. They took everyone in his cottage to the beach. He went to the beach. He was giving away, toys. That's a red flag when teenagers or children start giving away their belongings that they treasure. That's a flag that, they're contemplating suicide. And he had a good time, came back to the cottage, played games and everything, and went into his room and hung himself. Now, it happened years ago. This facility has now put in precautions where that will not happen. But we got the call, all of the therapists, we got the call late that night saying everyone needed to be at work early the next morning. And we did find out that the paramedics, they got there and they were trying to revive him. And they said that he was fighting. However, he lost his life. He hung himself, 8 years old, no hope. So we have to be mindful of some of the symptoms and behaviors of our young people and our teenagers. So now, parents, in addition, this is something else that you can do. Well, Joyce, what can I do? Listen, but listen with your heart. If your teenager comes to you and want to talk, make the time to sit down and hear them out. And not just with your ears, because sometimes we listen to respond. We need to listen with our heart. Be empathetic. Be open without judging or without telling the teen, well, this is what you should do. Just listen. Be available when they come to us. And avoid confrontation and trying to make them share. Well, you're not sharing. What else is it? What else? What is it? Just don't be confrontational. Praise them for making positive choices and be specific in your praise. My little 3-year-old grandbaby, when we're playing and she'll count to 20, and when she finished counting to 20, I'm like, yay, you counted all the way to 20. That's a specific praise. So that encourages her to do it again, right? And then remember that they are no longer children, parents. Remember, we parent our children based on their development. So as toddlers, we parent them because they're toddlers. We have to kind of like tell them what to do and how to do and show them. As teenagers, we parent them differently. As children, we parent them differently because they're developing differently. Teenagers are transitioning from being a child into adulthood. So now we parent them differently. We listen to them more and trying to understand what's going on with them. And then even our young adults and adults, we still parent, but we parent differently. So at each developmental stage, we parent our children differently. And also tell them frequently, I love you. So they won't have to guess. I've had parents say to me when I tell them to praise your child. I had a supervisor, and this was really shocking, a supervisor of mine, when, going through this training and we were teaching parents how to praise and play with their children. She said to me, I've never gotten on the floor and played with my children. That was my supervisor. I was like, okay, what do I say? And being able to praise them. I've had parents tell to me, well, that sounds so phony because you never done it. That's why it sounds phony, because you never told them specifically you're doing a great job in school. You're getting a good A, doing a great job in A. And I tell parents, try not to major on minor issues if they're doing well in school. Don't worry so much about that room, being messy. That's just what teenagers do. But tell them that you love them frequently. Validate their efforts. If there is a difficult subject that they're having problems with and they get a C, but they worked very hard, that C to me is an A. So when I have clients, they tell me, Joyce, it's just hard. It's hard. I don't understand. I've done this, I've done that. And I just, yay. To me, that C is an A. So validate their efforts. Remind them that they are uniquely and wonderfully made by God. And pray for them daily, every day, and affirm their worth and their value in God. And if we affirm their worth and their value in God, their self esteem will be high. And if we do all these things, parents, they will have a good, strong self esteem and know who they are, and no one can give them values. They have their own values, knowing that this is who I am and this is what I believe. So now, there are some resources. And 988 is now that 3-digit nationwide number that will connect you if your child is going through a crisis, or even if the child is going through a crisis. But if you know that your child is going through a crisis and there's something going on with your child and you suspect that maybe they're thinking about harming themselves or suicide, I would say do not call 988. Take your child to the nearest hospital or call the police, because the police can also initiate a 5150. Okay, so take them to the nearest hospital or call your nearest police department for them to come out and assess your children. So here are some resources. Those who live in the Inland Empire, you see there's a San Bernardino County Behavioral Health. It's a 24-hour helpline, and that number right here is on the screen as well. And they will be able to get help for you and your child immediately as well. So I hope that I've given you some information that may be useful to you or useful to someone else. Thank you all for being with us today. Please pray for the Prevailing Word of God Community Church, and also for issues of the heart ministry. So we want to try and bring more mental health information to you every other month. So in the month of January, we're preparing a couples workshop, and that is going to be, in segments. Excuse me, because there's so much to cover, when couples workshop. So we want you to be a part of that. That will not be live streamed. That will be right here, in our sanctuary. Registration will go up the 1st of January, and we are hoping to have it the latter part of January, because I am working with couples now. And I just thank God for this opportunity, working with couples who are having some issues. So that will be right here in our sanctuary. Also, it will be on our website, and registration will be available. But before I take any questions, I would like for you to be with us right here in the sanctuary on tomorrow morning at 11:30 for our Communion Sunday morning service. So thank you, everyone, for being with us on today. Any questions?
Yes, there's a few questions. The first question is, can a teen who has been parentified develop resentment for their parents? Please explain.
The answer to that is yes, they can. So please explain, excuse me, because the child is not having an opportunity to be a teenager. So that's where the resentment comes in. The resentment comes in anyone who have been parentified and helped their parents, even though their parent may need help. Sometimes parents need to maybe seek out some other resources. But the answer to that is yes, they will become resentful. They will become angry, and the parent may not even understand why they're angry. So let me just say this in addition to that. I'm working with a client, and this client is being parentified. And working with her, there's that resentment. So I've spoken with the parents, so parents are now understanding. So I said she needs to be able to be a teenager, okay? But this is one thing that this teenager told me. She said, Joyce, I feel guilty because, this parent is telling her, look what I'm doing for you. Look how I'm sacrificing for you. You're going to this prestigious private school. I'm working real hard to be able to get you into the school and do this for you, and you're so ungrateful. Wow. Wow. Can you imagine the impact on a 15, 16-year-old when their parent is telling them that? So yes, it can form resentment. So I would say talk to your child, see what you can do in order to help them feel like they are engaging in adolescent activities, and they feel like they are not missing their teenage years.
Another question is, what steps can parents take to build trust with their child?
Mm. Oh, that's a good question. Well, I would say, first of all, we talked about listening and listening with your heart and not your ears, but also not trying to force them. But one of the things that I will say too, if you want to build trust with your child, is just let them know that they can talk to you about anything. Now, this is a thing too, that some teenagers feel like if I talk to my parent, especially in some cultures, everybody in the family gonna know about it. You know, my aunt gonna know about it. My cousin's gonna know about it. You have to let the child know that anything that you tell me is between us. And you have to make sure that whatever you say to them, that you stick to it. Whatever you promise them, you want to build trust. Whatever you promise them, you stick to it. But make sure that what you promise them, you can follow through. So now if you want to do something, you say, well, this is something I want to do. I may not be able to do it, but if you promise them something, and my 3-year-old grandbaby, if I promise her some ice cream, I give her some ice cream. Okay? So whatever you promise them, you have to follow through. That helps build trust. And I will also say what strengthens the relationship is doing things with them. Doing something they like to do rather than say, okay, let's go to the movies today. Well, maybe they don't want to go to the movies. Ask them, you know what, I want to spend time with you today. What do you want to do? And then don't try to, well, how you doing with your friends? How this? Don't start asking all those questions. Just be present with your child. So I hope that answers the question. If the person is online, did that answer the question?
I have a question here. Great presentation, Evangelist. The question is, are there any other early signs or behaviors that teens may be contemplating suicide? Something maybe you haven't discussed
Discuss.
just yet?
Well, see, this is the thing about suicide. We don't know what our teenagers are thinking. Remember, I gave the example of those two parents who had no idea that their teenagers were thinking this. I'll give you another example of an adult who committed suicide, and I'll answer that question. That this adult, friend of ours at work, a co-worker, excuse me, coming to work on the weekends, no one was at work, she was emptying her office out because she planned on committing suicide on New Year's Eve. I'll never forget that because it was New Year's Eve. And she committed suicide. But everyone at work who knew her and liked her, we had no idea. So there really are no signs, because we cannot read another person's mind. But if you see a change in behavior, one of the signs that we did know that we can recognize, okay, this is one sign that all of us can recognize, is that when a person starts giving away their treasured belongings, okay? This woman at work, she took everything out of her office and she was just going around Christmas time, giving people little gifts. It is Christmas, but she's giving away things. But this 8-year-old boy, he was giving away his toys, things that he really liked, because he was thinking about committing suicide. So one of the signs is that when people start giving away treasured items that they like, that's a flag that maybe they are contemplating suicide. But other than that, if we're seeing a change in behavior and some of those symptoms that I mentioned, get help for your teenager. Get help for whoever it is as ASAP, as soon as possible. Okay?
I have a question. If there's a major life change that happens in a teen's life, would it be a good idea to, even if it seems like they're handling it pretty well, to put them in some sort of light therapy or some kind of counseling just to make sure that they're okay with the change?
Yes. When you say okay with the change, they're not okay with the change, but they can adjust. That's why it's called adjustment disorder. They can adjust to the change with a specialist, with a therapist helping them, because they will talk to a stranger, a therapist. They will confide in with a stranger, a therapist, you know, if they establish a good rapport with that therapist. They will let that therapist know what they're thinking, what's going on with them. So a therapist can help them see the positives and not look at so much the negative. It can help them with changing their thought process about what's going on. And rather than looking at, oh my gosh, I am not going to be with my friends anymore, but looking at, oh, wow, look at the new activities at this school. Which one would you like to be a part of? Look at you're going to gain new friends in addition to the ones that you have. So I think, not think, it would definitely be good to get them help. Absolutely. Well, thank you all for these questions. These are some good questions.
Can you further describe at-risk behaviors? Also, are there any red flags that, besides suicidal thoughts, that you have to get on immediately versus some that you kind of just watch and wait to see if they further develop into anything serious?
Okay, that was a two-part question, so let's go with the first one. You said, can we
Can you
identify at-risk
further,
behavior?
further describe at-risk
Oh, okay.
behaviors?
Describe it. At-risk behavior can be cutting. Can be, as I said, some teenagers learn how to cut on social media, but some don't. But it can be cutting. It could be cutting is a form of them saying, I don't like myself, I don't like my life. So they're cutting, trying to get rid of the bad feelings, you know, and make themselves feel good. So that's a part of it. So cutting, sometimes teenagers will wear long sleeves because they don't want their parents to see the cuts. They may cut on their legs, so you may not be able to see cutting. So that is one at-risk behavior. And also, we talked about other at-risk behaviors is engaging in substance use, you know, drinking a little bit more. So these at-risk behaviors with adolescent, with teenagers, some of them are not because they are changing physically. It could be because they're depressed, and it could be because they need help. And part two?
Yeah, that almost answers part two, which is is there a difference between like red flags and some that you can just watch, signs that you can just watch and wait before you make an immediate decision on what's happening?
Well, I will tell you, a big flag is a change in behavior. It's a big flag. You know, teenagers normally are defiant, okay? But it is not an overly defiant behavior. It's not overly defiant behavior. It's not oppositional defiant. But when we see that they are just argumentative and defiant and irritable over small things, that's a flag. Something's going on with them, okay? Or when we see that now they're not eating anymore and they could be saying, well, I'm just on a diet, you know, watch that, because that could be because they're depressed. Or when they are eating too much, you know, some of these signs can be signs of depression. And I will say that young people who cut will have very, very low self-esteem. So those are some of the signs. You just have to be careful also about how they dress. I do know that there's this gothic type dress where, you know, there was a trend at one time. I don't know if it's still a trend where teenagers would all dress in all black. Well, we have to be careful with that as well. Okay, what are they involved in? Are they involved in some cultish type activities? So we have to be very careful about who our children are associating with. And I know parents, you know, nowadays but we have to be mindful of that. Who are your friends? Invite their friends over to the house. Meet their friends. Meet their friends' parents. That may sound a little old school, but you want to know, you know, who your children are hanging out with. If their parents are allowing them to do certain things in their home that you're not allowing your child to do. So you want to be aware of who your children are associating with and the parents.
Are there any future plans for these types of presentations?
Yes, there are. I'm so glad you asked that question. We are trying to have mental health presentations every other month. But you know what? Those of you who ask those questions, I would love to see your smiling face right here so I can meet you and we can discuss these things a bit further. It won't be so time limited. So, yes, we are. There is a big workshop that's coming up in January for couples. If you are planning on being engaged, if you are dating somebody, you're a couple. If you're married, you're a couple. So please look out for that. But yes, there will be more. I plan on doing one on ADHD, and the our children, especially our African American children, are overly diagnosed with ADHD. Sometimes they're underdiagnosed, but we want to be careful that when our children or the schools are putting these labels on our children, we want to make sure that that diagnosis is correct and that it is not something that maybe just a teacher said, oh, your child has ADHD. And, I've told parents, when they come to me, oh, my child has ADHD. And I say to them, well, who told you your child has ADHD? Well, the teacher. Okay, we value our teachers. We love our teachers. But teachers do not have a degree in psychology. So we have to be careful. And we have to make sure that we have our children assessed by the appropriate person, which would be a psychologist or even a therapist. But a therapist cannot do testing. Only a psychologist can do testing for ADHD.
Last question. If future plans for presentations are planned, will they be Christian-based or and not exclusively secular? Can you please elaborate?
I can use scriptures in everything I do. This presentation, it Christian-based, secular-based, absolutely. The couples workshop, definitely there's going to be some scriptures involved in that. But we want people who are also not saved, not a Christian. We want them to be a part of these because, see, that's one way of us evangelizing. So it'll be both. But we want those people who think that all the presentation is just going to be scripture, 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 scripture. It's not a Bible study. It's a presentation. It's a workshop, okay? But we want everyone to come and be able to be blessed by the information that they'll receive, which hopefully by the grace of God will help them in relationships, will help them in life and raising their children. So thank you for that question. Any other questions? Oh, that's it. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for your questions. And please, in the chat, leave your email address so we can follow up with you and let you know what the next upcoming presentations are going to be so you can be right here in the sanctuary with us. I thank my pastor, Pastor Anthony Harden, for allowing me to do this. And I thank all of you who are on live stream and all of you who are right here with us on today. I just have to thank my sons and their wives. I call them my ride people. They ride with me and they support everything that we do here at the church. So thank you all so very much. God bless you. This ends our presentation.